Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we cut through the noise of complex, often emotionally daunting sources, extracting the most vital nuggets of knowledge so you can be truly well-informed. Today, we are taking on perhaps the most emotionally resonant and historically significant set of sources we have ever encountered. We're talking about the deeply personal and monumental excerpts from the Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank.
It's one of those texts that I think almost everyone knows of.
Exactly. For so many of us, Anne Frank exists as a historical figure, a symbol of World War II terror, often, reduced to a paragraph in a textbook. But our mission today is to move beyond that summary. We are here to undertake a psychological deep dive, to understand the raw, vibrant inner world, the intense conflicts, and the absolutely enduring human spirit revealed in Anne's own words during those 2 harrowing years in hiding. We really want to understand what it meant to be Anne, not the symbol, but the person.
And that emphasis is just so critical. We are reading this diary as a profound piece of literature, a brilliant coming-of-age story that unfolds under the most unbearable pressure imaginable.
Right.
Every witty observation, every profound emotional breakthrough, every moment of familial conflict we discuss, it's all framed by the knowledge that outside, their Jewish neighbors and friends were being systematically hunted and murdered. Mortal danger, physical degradation, and fear were the silent, constant co-authors of every single entry Anne wrote.
Okay, so let's unpack this journey. I think we should start with the final moments of Anne's pre-hiding life. A quick, dazzling glimpse of the free Anne just before the light was extinguished. We begin with the day that everything changed, her 13th birthday, June 12th, 1942.
Yeah.
It's just so hard to reconcile the sheer bouncing energy of the girl described in those first entries with the tragic fate that awaits her.
It really is.
She writes of waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, just buzzing with excitement, having to force herself to wait until 6:45 before she could rush into the living room.
It perfectly captures that universal preteen experience, that anticipatory joy of a birthday. She catalogs her gifts with, typical teenage enthusiasm.
What does she get?
Well, there were roses, peonies, a blue blouse, a game, a small bottle of grape juice, which she says is a bit like wine,
Choice.
cold cream, 2.50 guilders, gift certificates for 2 books, and a platter of homemade cookies. And the great detail there is that she, an accomplished baker, made them herself.
Wow.
And so importantly, a letter from her beloved Grammy right on time.
But the most significant gift, the one that is the catalyst for everything we are reading today, was the diary itself. And here is where the psychological profile of Anne Frank just crystallizes, even before the historical context fully clamps down on her.
Absolutely.
She notes, famously, that paper has more patience than people.
Yeah.
So my question is, why does a girl with loving parents and a 16-year-old sister, and, as she says, about 30 people I can call friends, feel such profound loneliness that she can only trust paper?
It's a moment of surprising, really painful insight into her own emotional development. Loneliness, for Anne, was not a result of unpopularity.
No, not at all. She admits to having a whole throng of admirers.
Exactly. Her loneliness stemmed from a lack of qualitative connection. She felt utterly unable to discuss anything beyond ordinary, everyday things, gossip, movies, clothes, with her existing social circle.
So, Kitty, the diary was created not out of necessity due to isolation, but out of necessity due to her own emotional depth.
That's a perfect way to put it.
She needed a confidant who could handle the complexity of her interior life, someone who wouldn't mock or misunderstand her true, serious self.
Precisely. She was already operating on a higher intellectual and emotional plane than her peers, and this quality, this keen, sometimes brutal observational skill was fully developed during her time at the Jewish Lyceum.
Oh, she did not hold back when describing her classmates.
Not one bit.
Let's look at some of those early assessments. She was a brilliant judge of character, even then.
She's almost journalistic in her critiques. Betty Blumendahl is poor but hardworking. She very quickly downgrades Jacqueline Van Marsen from best friend to supposedly because she recognizes that the friendship was, superficial.
And then you get the really cutting remarks.
Oh, yeah.
Aimed at girls like E.S., who she calls the constant talker who fidgets, and especially J.R., who Anne just skewers as a detestable, sneaky, stuck-up, two-faced gossip who thinks she's so grown up.
That is the voice of a girl who processes the world through critical analysis, and she applied the same discerning lens to her male classmates.
Right. Her admirer, Maurice Coster, was pretty much of a pest.
And she dismisses Rob Cohen as an obnoxious, two-faced, lying, sniveling little goof. It's just ruthless.
It is. But this capacity for sharp, immediate judgment developed in the, relative safety of school gossip, is crucial.
Yeah.
Because soon she would be turning that exact highly critical lens inward.
Yes. On the 7 people she would be forced to share an attic with for 2 years. That observational pressure cooker, it really defines the annex.
But this vibrant, free life was already being methodically demolished by the increasingly severe anti-Jewish decrees enforced by the German occupation.
It wasn't one sudden blow. It was a sequence of daily humiliations and restrictions designed to erase their normal existence.
The source material details this administrative strangulation so clearly.
It does. I mean, the Jewish Lyceum itself was mandated because Jewish children were forbidden to attend public schools. But before that, the sequence of decrees was just relentless.
The requirement to wear the yellow star,
The forced turning in of bicycles, the prohibition from using streetcars,
the restriction of shopping hours to only between 3 and 5 p.m.,
and then forbidding cinemas, theaters, sports, and ultimately restricting visits to non-Jewish friends.
It's just hard to imagine the psychological weight of knowing every single mundane action you take is regulated and subject to immediate prohibition. I found her friend Jacqueline Van Marsen's quote so devastating.
Which one was that?
I don't dare do anything anymore because I'm afraid it's not allowed. That's the definition of a life lived entirely under the shadow of prohibition.
And that quote underscores the fear that paralyzed so many people. But Anne, even as her world shrank, she still fought back, not with physical resistance, but with intellectual wit.
Yes. Her famous conflict with her math teacher, Mr. Keesing, shows her extraordinary resilience.
Yes, Mr. Keesing, who was angry with her for the longest time because I talk so much.
After multiple warnings, he assigned her extra homework, an essay titled A Chatterbox, and she just turned the punishment into a platform.
She didn't just write some flimsy excuse. She constructed a formal argument. She argued that talking is a natural and inherited female trait, citing her mother as proof.
And concluding that since it was inherited, there was virtually nothing she could do to break the habit. It's just so quick-witted, humorous, and fundamentally logical.
Mr. Keesing, to his credit, laughed it off, but when she continued talking in the next class, he assigned the second essay, an incorrigible chatterbox.
And when that failed to quiet her, he assigned the ultimate intended humiliation. Quack, 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 said Mr. Chatterback.
This is the moment Anne proves her genius. Instead of being silenced or defeated, she collaborated with a friend, San, to write the entire thing in verse.
The poem was about a mother duck and a father swan whose 3 baby ducklings were bitten to death by the father.
Because they quack too much.
The outcome is a perfect example of Anne's ability to turn the tables. The joke entirely backfired on the teacher. He took the joke the right way, read the poem to the entire class, and even shared it with other classes.
And from then on, Anne was not only allowed to talk, but Mr. Keesing started joining in the jokes.
It's just proof that Anne's inner strength and wit were honed and ready before the hiding began.
Absolutely. And her parents were relaxed about grades as long as she was healthy and happy. But Anne was already driven to intellectual excellence, pushing back against authority, using only her language skills. This is the resource she takes into the annex, her pen.
Her father, Otto Frank, began preparing her for the inevitable conversation about hiding, saying it would be very hard for us to live cut off from the rest of the world. Let's transition now to that terrifying physical reality and the moment they went from citizens to shadows.
The transition was brutally sudden. On the morning of July 6, 1942, they arrived at 263 Prinsengracht, above Otto Frank's office.
And the chaos was immediate.
Oh, yeah. Anne writes that their living room and all the other rooms were so full of stuff that I can't find the words to describe it. They had shipped in cardboard boxes filled with clothes, books, and supplies to the office beforehand.
And the immediate dynamic tells us everything about who the Frank family members were under stress.
It really does.
Mother and Margot were so tired, miserable, they immediately collapsed onto bare mattresses. But Father and Anne, the 2 cleaner-uppers, they immediately started the grueling task of cleaning, organizing, and trying to impose some order on the chaos.
Anne's attempt to impose identity on that barren, frightening space is just incredibly poignant. Her primary concern was making her bare walls feel like home.
So she used all the available light to plaster them with her entire postcard and movie star collection.
It was a teenager's desperate universal attempt to create a private sanctuary in a place designed only for anonymous survival. They even stitched crooked, makeshift curtains out of scraps of fabric because the windows were initially visible to the outside.
And the fear was instant and absolute. They
Yeah.
had to forbid Margot from coughing, even with a bad cold, because the warehouse workers were just downstairs.
Right, and listening to the radio was only possible in the private office, constantly tuned low, straining to hear the BBC for news, while at the same time being terrified the neighbors or the workmen might hear the faint sounds.
And this claustrophobic environment was about to get much, much more crowded with the arrival of the Van Pels family, who are referred to as Van Daan in the diary, and later Mr. Pfeffer.
And the arrival of the Van Daan family introduces a necessary, if dark, vein of humor into the narrative.
Oh, absolutely. The specifics of what the Van Pels family chose to carry into hiding are just priceless.
So Mrs. Van Daan arrives carrying a hat box, but instead of a fashionable hat, it contains a large chamber pot.
Of course it does.
Because, as Anne records, she just don't feel at home without my chamber pot. Mr. Van Daan, by contrast, carried a collapsible tea table.
A chamber pot and a tea table.
These are the sacred, precious relics of comfort and dignity they chose to take into their imprisonment.
The creation of the secret itself, that physical barrier, is one of the most famous parts of the story. Mr. Voskuil, one of the kind helpers, built the bookcase that swings out on hinges, completely concealing the entrance to the annex.
And it truly transformed the annex into the secret annex.
Ah.
But Anne captures the immediate, often ridiculous physical consequence.
Which was?
Everyone kept walking around with bumps on their foreheads from hitting the low doorway until Peter finally cushioned it with a towel stuffed with wood shavings. It's a perfect microcosm of their life. Monumental danger mitigated by silly, improvised solutions.
And their absence required a complex external fiction. The rumor that Otto Frank deliberately spread that they had escaped to Belgium, perhaps riding their bikes or being loaded into a military vehicle.
Was incredibly successful in throwing off immediate suspicion.
The final, and arguably most disruptive resident to join, was Fritz Pfeffer, known in the diary as Mr. Dussel. His entrance is just high drama.
Miette brought him up, and he was completely stunned. He was convinced they had actually managed to escape to Belgium, which just demonstrates how successful Otto's deception had been.
Right. Anne records his stammered confusion. But are you nicked in Belgium? The officer, the Otto, they were not coming. Your escape was not working.
His shock immediately cemented the annex's reality. This was not a temporary hiding place, it was a sealed tomb. And almost immediately, Dussel was confronted with the absurd reality of their existence, captured brilliantly in the satirical prospectus and guide to the secret annex.
This document, which the men drafted, is such an amazing coping mechanism. It advertises the annex as a unique facility for the temporary accommodation of Jews, boasting of cozy wood stoves for heating, and a private radio with a direct line to London, New York, Tel Aviv.
It's a brilliant piece of dark satire. It uses bureaucratic language to mock their impossible situation. The fine print, however, is the terrifying reality.
What's in the fine print?
The diet is low-fat and, most crucially, the rest hours when no noise can be made, when the warehouse workers are downstairs, are detailed. They even included a ban on listening to German news or speaking German, claiming only the language of civilized people may be spoken.
The prospectus functions as a way to control the uncontrollable. By writing down the rules, they normalize the abnormal. They try to treat their extreme state of siege as if it were a slightly inconvenient boarding house stay.
Absolutely. And Dussel quickly realized how absolute those rules were, asking Anne specific questions about how we've arranged to use the washroom and when we're allowed to go to the toilet.
And this tension between bureaucratic formality and basic, messy human needs would soon define their lives.
It really would. The tension of the outside world was immense, but the friction generated inside the annex was constant and, well, exhausting. The lack of space, the lack of privacy, the scarcity of resources, it turned every minor annoyance into a source of explosive conflict.
Okay, so let's delve into that daily grind, where confinement and fear just amplified human flaws. And, having already proven her sharp observational skills, turned that critical eye onto her housemates, particularly the Van Daan family.
The Van Daan's behavior quickly revealed the psychological degradation caused by hiding. Mrs. Van Daan, the chamber pot aficionado, became moody, sulking, and demonstrated this really petty selfishness.
Right, and note she even removed her sheets from the communal linen closet and just assumed the Franks sheets would cover both families' needs.
And her behavior regarding food in a time of starvation and immense risk from their helpers was particularly galling. And notice Mrs. Van Daan would leave small scraps of food in the bottom of pots instead of transferring them.
just to avoid washing the pots and pans herself, ensuring the task would fall to Margot.
It's a devastating insight into how fear and confinement erode basic communal empathy. Meanwhile, Mr. Van Dane was a source of constant petty cruelty, especially toward the Frank girls. Anne records him mocking Margot's small appetite, telling her, "I suppose you do it to keep your figure."
Ugh. Those kinds of barbed comments repeated daily are far harder to bear than a single air raid.
I think so. And then there was Dussel, Anne's unfortunate new roommate, who proved to be an old-fashioned disciplinarian and a tattletale.
Yet he also provided one of the diary's most necessary moments of comic relief, his attempt to set up a dental practice.
That scene, a quack at work, is just essential for emotional survival in the narrative. Dussel, thinking he could still practice dentistry, convinced Mrs. Van Dane to be his first patient.
And she was so hysterical with fear and maybe the absurdity of the situation that when Dussel tried to scrape out a cavity, she thrashed until the probe got stuck in her tooth.
It's chaotic brilliance. Dussel, professional and calm, stands with his hands on his hips while Mrs. Van Dane is screaming and physically pushing the instrument further into her own mouth.
While the rest of the family, including Anne, roared with laughter.
And even in that moment of physical pain, Mrs. Van Dane was worried about her soup and her food. It just shows how the ridiculousness of their daily life became a lifeline against despair.
The conflict wasn't just personality clashes, though. It was a brutal fight for physical and intellectual space.
It was. Dussel proved incredibly stubborn over the shared desk in their room, accusing Anne of being shamefully self-centered for asking for 2 uninterrupted afternoons a week to write and study.
He even suggested she wanted to fail her exams so she could blame him.
That denial of her workspace was deeply painful for Anne, who needed the diary and her studies to maintain her sanity and her identity. This lack of physical and intellectual privacy is the central psychological cost of the Secret Annex.
And speaking of lack of privacy, we need to address the detailed logistics of the bathroom problem. A seemingly mundane issue that just sums up the extreme constraints they faced.
Oh, yeah. Anne records the nightmare of the day the plumber was working downstairs. Not only was the water shut off, but the bathroom was entirely off limits. They had to sacrifice a clean canning jar as an improvised chamber pot for their calls of nature during the day.
What's fascinating is Anne's perspective on this. She notes that the unseemly toilet arrangements weren't half as difficult as having to sit still all day and not say a word.
Right. For Miss Quack Quack Quack, silence and immobility were 10 times worse than the physical discomfort of the crude plumbing situation.
The psychological burden just outweighed the physical one. And this pressure manifested most painfully in Anne's relationship with her mother, Edith Frank.
It really did. She records a growing contempt and a feeling of being completely misunderstood, leading to a vicious circle of unpleasantness and sorrow.
She felt a deep emotional distance, realizing that her mother and Margot had ceased to count long ago when it came to her deep feelings. She clung fiercely to her father, Odo, only to retain the last ounce of family feeling.
This emotional break from her mother is a profound, if painful, element of her maturation. But Anne applied the same critical honesty to herself. She reflected on being a bundle of contradictions.
Struggling constantly between the lighthearted Anne, the flirt, the clown, the amusing girl, and the purer, deeper, and finer Anne.
She recognized that the lighthearted Anne was a mask, a diversion, something easily forgotten. And she openly admitted she was terrified to show the deeper, more serious Anne because she feared people will mock me, think I'm ridiculous and sentimental.
This internal war is truly the heart-touching core of the diary. She was hiding not only from the Nazis, but also from her own confined housemates, sacrificing her true self just to keep the fragile peace and avoid being vulnerable to criticism.
That struggle to maintain dignity while hiding her true identity required immense emotional labor.
And adding to the psychological decay was the physical degradation. The material reality of their imprisonment slowly chipped away at their dignity.
Yeah, the sources list the slow physical deterioration. Father's frayed trousers, mother's corset snapping beyond repair, Margot wearing a bra 2 sizes too small.
Anne's undershorts being so small they don't even cover my stomach, and the shared unwashed flannel sheets.
This decay of personal dignity, the inability to maintain basic hygiene or a respectable appearance, made Anne deeply anxious. She wondered how they could ever hope to regain the position we had before the war, showing that the fight for survival was not just about staying alive.
Right, it was about retaining their social identity and self-respect. Amidst all this intense familial tension and deprivation, surprising necessary relationship begins to bloom. The bond between Anne and Peter Van Pels.
It was almost a clinical inevitability. Both teenagers were desperate for an emotional outlet away from the claustrophobic arguments of their parents.
And Anne's initial assessment of Peter was highly dismissive.
Oh, totally. Shy, awkward, and an obnoxious boy who lies around on his bed all day.
But the attic, that semi-private space away from the arguing adults, became their unintentional sanctuary. It was where they could speak freely.
The shift began when Peter started opening up, sharing his dreams, like wanting to run a rubber plantation in the Dutch East Indies.
And he also exposed a massive vulnerability, admitting he wished he weren't Jewish and didn't want anyone to know he was Jewish after the war.
That comment caused Anne a momentary pang because it highlighted a fundamental difference. Peter saw his Jewish identity as a curse and a target, while Anne had already begun to see it as a source of strength, realizing they were the chosen people meant to endure.
Despite that difference, the relationship deepened, moving into physical intimacy, beginning with Peter asking for goodnight kisses.
And the emotional climax came during a terrifying police or air raid scare, when Anne recalls lying in his arms, feeling his body trembling, a potent mix of adolescent comfort and shared mortal fear.
What's truly extraordinary about their relationship, given the restrictions, is the frankness of their intellectual curiosity. They began having surprisingly mature conversations about sex.
They did. Anne, unable to ask her mother, asked Peter.
And Peter, trying to show off his knowledge, attempted to enlighten her on presentive prophylactics, though he used the wrong German word for them, a blunder, and duly records in the diary.
Which is such a perfect detail. And Anne's entry on female anatomy is just startlingly detailed and open. She described realizing she had been unaware of the inner labia and described the external structure.
Culminating in the observation that the vaginal opening is so small I can hardly imagine how a man could get in there, much less how a baby could come out.
This frankness, hidden from the judgmental world of the Annex, shows Anne's intense intellectual hunger. But here's where we need to introduce a bit of critical inquiry. It's amazing that she prioritized character over affection while confined. But wasn't that realization also a defensive move? Was she subconsciously creating emotional distance, knowing any relationship was fundamentally doomed in the Annex?
That's a crucial interpretation.
Yeah.
Anne was perhaps too smart for the situation. She reached a point where she could critically assess Peter, realizing he was fundamentally my conquest, and that she had actually created an image of him that she projected onto the shy boy.
It was a psychological necessity. She had to regain her independence from him to survive emotionally.
She came to the mature, if painful, conclusion that Peter lacked the core character traits she truly admired. Too little willpower, too little courage and strength. She realized he was emotionally immature, wanting only happiness and peace of mind.
Traits that were incompatible with the ambitious future she planned for herself.
This decisive move, prioritizing her self-assessment and future goals over fleeting affection, marks a massive step in her personal growth, transforming the crush into a profound learning experience.
She traded romance for self-discovery.
And her ultimate commitment wasn't to Peter, but to her future self and her writing. She found solace and hope, not in human connection alone, but by looking outside, even if only through dusty windows.
She believed looking at the sky and nature was much better medicine than valerian or bromide.
And her commitment to her writing became absolute. She declared her ambition to be a journalist or a writer, determined to go on living even after my death.
She began viewing her time in the Annex not as a prison, but as a good beginning to an interesting life.
That intellectual conviction fueled her most powerful philosophical insights, including a clear, passionate feminist argument.
Yes, she condemned the societal system that values men above women, arguing that women, especially through the pain and illness of childbirth, are much tougher and more courageous soldiers than all those big-mouthed, freedom-fighting heroes put together.
She wasn't just asking for equality. She was arguing for inherent superiority in terms of endurance and courage, demanding that women be respected for their strength, not just their capacity to perpetuate the race.
This level of moral, ethical, and political reflection, achieved by a girl who's barely 15, is what elevates the diary from a wartime account to a timeless literary masterpiece.
But while Anne was exploring her inner world, the external world kept intruding with constant cycles of terror and brief elation.
The atmosphere inside the Secret Annex was defined by this whiplash. Moments of sheer, paralyzing fear, punctuated by sudden, glorious moments of hope dictated entirely by the illegal radio tuned to London.
The threat of exposure was constant. The fear led to rules against running water or flushing during the day, but the close calls were far worse. The recurrent sound of machine gun fire was routine, enough to make Mother jump out of bed.
But nothing compared to the night of the burglary.
That was the moment of complete collapse. Peter, Father, and Mr. Van Dane were downstairs investigating the sound of forced doors. The four women waited upstairs, suspended in terror, debating whether this was the moment they should burn the radio, or worse, the diary, if caught.
Anne records the spine-chilling moment when the police came right up to the concealed bookcase, rattling it. She whispers the thought that went through everyone's mind, "Now we're done for."
8 hearts pounding in unison, realizing their sanctuary was inches away from being breached.
And miraculously, they were spared, reinforcing Anne's sense that God was truly watching over us.
But these moments of terror were balanced by collective elation when the news arrived. The resignation of Mussolini brought immense joy.
Oh, yeah. Anne wrote, "We jumped for joy. Brings us hope. Hope for an end to the war. Hope for peace."
This was a communal affirmation that their suffering was not endless.
And then came the huge commotion on D-Day, June 6, 1944. The BBC broadcast reports of the massive invasion force, 11,000 planes, 4,000 landing craft.
Anne was electric, focusing her admiration on Churchill, noting his courage, saying he must be at least 70, and doesn't seem to know what fear is.
It was an injection of pure, vibrant, intoxicating hope. But the harsh, mundane reality of food scarcity always returned. Always. Anne chronicles the diet shifting to only boiled lettuce, spinach, and rotten potatoes, a grim counterpoint to the glorious war news.
And they were so desperate for a break from their confines that the chaotic canning of 24 crates of strawberries, done with the office staff downstairs, curtains open, noisily felt like a vacation.
She describes the absolute pandemonium. And grabbing hot water, Margot getting buckets, the Annex contingent and the supply corps all mixed up, shouting and banging doors in the middle of the day.
Anne notes she was trembling with excitement, thinking, are we really in hiding?
For that brief hour, they were out into the world again, engaging in a normal, messy human activity.
We absolutely must pause here to acknowledge the people who made these moments of survival and even moments of joy possible. Their helpers, the Christians who ran the office downstairs.
Their heroism is immeasurable. Their risks were constant and total.
Anne notes that they put on their most cheerful expressions, bring flowers and gifts, and emphasizes, our helpers prove theirs every day by their good spirits and affection.
They were risking the dreadful fate of the Jews they sheltered, a conscious decision made daily.
And the emotional and physical cost to the helpers was immense. Mr. Kleiman was constantly ill. Bep suffered nervous fits from being overworked, especially after her boyfriend was sent to Germany.
And they operated under constant strain and suspicion, particularly from the warehouse employee, Mr. Van Maren.
The sources reveal a heartbreaking, insidious secondary effect of the persecution. Anne records her dismay upon hearing that the Dutch attitude toward Jews was subtly changing.
Right. Some people in the underground were suggesting that even German Jews who fled before the war should be sent back after liberation.
This was a chilling realization that even survival might not mean security. Anne called it sad, very sad. She pointed out the enduring injustice. What one Christian does is his own responsibility. What one Jew does reflects on all Jews.
She worried that they might have to shoulder our bundles and move on away from this beautiful country, even after the war was won.
This fear that anti-Semitism might endure, even after the terror subsided, highlights the incredible depth of Anne's final reflections. She was grappling with profound moral questions about identity, nationhood, and humanity.
At an age when most people are focused only on exams and first dates.
So as our deep dive comes to a close, we return to the depth of Anne's philosophical strength, captured in the final entries written just weeks before her capture. She achieved a core faith that is simply breathtaking, given her circumstances.
Despite the horror, despite questioning whether the world was transforming into a wilderness, she repeatedly returned to her faith in humanity.
Her core philosophy, which she fiercely clung to, was, I still believe, in spite of everything, that people are truly good at heart.
That belief was her shield.
And she was absolutely resolute about her path forward. Her final resolve was fierce, driven by a desire to be more than just a victim of history.
If God lets me live, I'll achieve more than Mother ever did. I'll make my voice heard. I'll go out into the world and work for mankind.
She was determined to be a writer or a journalist, stating, I want to go on living even after my death. She saw her diary not just as a record, but as the groundwork for her future literary career.
And her self-identification as a powerful, independent individual is extraordinary. She writes, I know that I'm a woman with inner strength and a great deal of courage.
She even decided that her first wish after the war was to become a Dutch citizen, proving her loyalty to the country that had hidden her, proclaiming, "I won't give up until I've reached my goal."
It is just devastating to read these bold plans that defined her maturity, knowing the sudden, brutal end to her aspirations. The residents of the Secret Annex were arrested and deported on August 4th, 1944.
They left on the last transport to leave Westerbork for Auschwitz on September 3, 1944.
The fates of the 8 residents speak to the horrific efficiency of the genocide. Herman van Pels was gassed shortly after arriving at Auschwitz. Fritz Pfeffer died in the Neuengamme concentration camp in December 1944.
Edith Frank succumbed to hunger and exhaustion in Auschwitz-Birkenau in January 1945.
And Peter van Pels, Anne's emotional confidant, was forced on a death march to Mauthausen, where he died on May 5th, 1945, just 3 days before the camp was finally liberated.
And Anne and Margot.
They were transported to Bergen-Belsen at the end of October. They both died from typhus in the horrifying conditions there in early 1945, likely in late February or early March. The bodies of both girls were dumped in mass graves.
Of the 8 in the Secret Annex, only Otto Frank survived the concentration camps.
He returned to Amsterdam, and thanks to the diligence of Mep, who had retrieved the diary, Otto devoted the rest of his life to fulfilling Anne's ambition, sharing her message with the world, allowing her to go on living even after my death.
Mep, Kleiman, and Kugler all survived and helped preserve this vital testament.
They did.
And that leads us to our final, provocative thought for you, the listener. Anne, writing in her confinement, found a way to internally reframe her situation, recording this astonishing reflection. "I look upon our life in hiding as an interesting adventure, full of danger and romance, and every privation as an amusing addition to my diary. I have to laugh at the humorous side of the most dangerous moments."
So, considering the definitive tragic end to that adventure, we have to contemplate this. Was this ability to find adventure and humor in the face of oblivion a delusion? Or was it the ultimate, most profound act of human resistance against despair and nihilism?
Her internal world preserved on those pages is her lasting, enduring victory against the forces that sought to silence her.
Think about that as you go about your day.